Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled Broken Truck. How about a broken jaw? Background: back in my school days I always had a hard time fitting in and would go through phases to fit in with crowds and make friends, so I was pretty deep in a redneck phase, had a ridiculously oversized truck with 37 mud tires of course and plenty of hick friends who were also wannabes. We lived in a large city, so JR year of high school comes around and I just transferred to a new school. My best friend had just passed away and I meet one of his friends, let's call him Butthead. Now Butthead is another white trashtivist and we instantly hit it off. Butthead isn't a great looking guy and doesn't have money, a job, or a vehicle but somehow manages to pull really pretty girls, so when prom comes around he asks to borrow my truck to pick up his date. He doesn't have a license either but we were such good friends I told him just don't be stupid and bring it back full of gas. I had to work that night anyway so it wasn't a big deal. Fast forward 3 hours, my phone is getting blown up by every high school kid with an oversized truck telling me Butthead's date stood him up and he decided to go mudding during a thunderstorm and my truck was sunk. Great, but I've been stuck before, dick move, but he was my friend nonetheless. After getting several other trucks stuck in the process and Butthead paying for a professional to come duck the stuck vehicles, all is forgiven. For a few hours, I'm driving down the road happy to have my truck back. The left tire is making an odd noise. Probably just a rock in the brake pan. A block away from home and my truck hits the ground. Sparks fly, differential fluid covers the ground. My axle snapped in half. Turns out Butthead cracked it by hitting a large rock doing 35 on an off-road trail. So I hear from mutual friends who were there on this joy ride. Side story. Cops show up and try to tow my truck. I somehow manage to park it to their satisfaction with a front axle that's literally in half. $4,300 in repairs later and my truck is back on the road, still friends with Butthead as he promised to pay for the damages and up until this fiasco he was always straight with me. A couple months go by and I haven't seen a dime but he's buying cans of dip and McDonald's every day. So I start getting on him about my money and he eventually just disappears, won't answer calls, dropped out and is bumming around the next town over. 3 months later I get wind that he just bought a Harley for $7,000. I'm upset at this point. The revenge: about a week and a half after I hear he's got this shiny red Harley I run into him at a party. He's quite intoxicated and I had just walked in the door. Butthead had forgotten about the entire situation it seemed and came up to greet me like a lost friend and shake my hand. He had about 7 inches and 120 pounds on my scrawny self, but seeing red I shake his hand and swing at his jaw expecting a fight that will most likely lose, but karma was on my side as he hit the floor. A mutual friend took him to the ER and later sent me pictures of his x-rays, hairline fractures on his upper and lower jaw, had to have them wired shut to heal up and pay a hefty bill due to lack of insurance. Fortunately he never pressed charges. I wish I would have just filed a suit or thought about the consequences of assaulting someone in a room full of witnesses, but being a teenager I was content in the moment. The next one is titled Small Motorbike vs. Small. Waves pinky finger. I should preface this by saying I was raised by a narcissist and I'm extremely passive-aggressive as a result. Years ago, I bought my first motorbike. A tiny 125cc bike that with my 82 kilograms body weight, could barely do 90 kilometers per hour on a flat road and would lose speed going up hills despite me revving as hard as I could. That was my first motorbike and I loved her with my whole heart. At the time of this incident I was still on my L plates, my learner license which requires the driver/rider to display a yellow square with a large black L on the back of their motorbike. I had two, one attached next to the number plate and one tied to my backpack. So I'm cruising along on my bike to visit my family and I'm heading up this one notorious hill that is deceptively steep on the incline. It curves around so it's hard to see but gets quite steep over the distance, so I'd hit the bottom of the hill at 90 and be doing 70 at the top. I'd always take the left lane, slow lane in Australia, so that people could overtake safely on my right, the fast lane, if they needed to. I was the only vehicle on that stretch of road when a man in a very expensive looking car decides to come flying around the curve and almost hit the back of the motorbike. He would have easily been doing 110 plus in the 90 speed limit, and instead of moving over and overtaking safely, he decided to slam on his brakes, sit inches from my bike, and beep his horn while screaming at me to get off the road. I move as far over in the left lane as I can without riding into the shoulder, but he won't overtake. He just screams and beeps and revs until I get to the top of the hill, when he finally decides to overtake and move off. I cruise on down the far side of the hill and suddenly realize he's gotten caught in the lights at the off-ramp, so I carry on down the off-ramp and cruise to the front of the queue for the lights. Lane filtering is legal here, and stop my bike just in front of his car. Wait for the lights. The light goes green. I move forward about a meter and stall the bike. I've seen some shades of red and purple in my life, but never anything like the color of douchebag's face. He completely loses it, screaming and swearing and threatening to have me arrested and/or shot. The lady in the car behind him gets out her phone and starts recording him. I ignore him, restart the bike in a belch of black smoke, and just as the light turns yellow I speed off around the corner, leaving him there throwing a massive tantrum. Would I do that again, now that I'm older and wiser? Hell no. But it felt so good at the time. The next one is titled, Idiot Driver Harasses My Dad. My dad just keeps on walking. So this happened a week or so ago. Sadly I wasn't there to witness it, but have just been relayed the story and thought it would fit here perfectly. Also sorry for the long back story. It's needed to explain things to people who aren't in the know. D equals my dad, C equals idiot driver, P equals passenger. Near where my parents live is this thing called a quiet lane. This is a type of rural road which gives more power back to pedestrians, who are free to walk on it. Cars are allowed on it, but it must be at a severely reduced speed. Typically, pedestrians move off the road for the occasional car which comes along, and the driver usually signals their thanks to the pedestrian. Some don't, but some people are just rude. This lane connects two villages, A and B, for anonymity's sake. There is another, a main road, which goes at the national speed limit, 60 miles per hour, which is obviously more used due to its easier access, better road surface, and is just quicker. Unfortunately, the local council has started road works to fix a dangerous junction at the entrance to Village A, causing much traffic to spill onto the quiet lane so as to skip the temporary traffic lights. Needless to say, this has caused some issues with the local residents, which some people now seeming to think the road is there for their personal use and not everyone's. It all came to a head when one driver decided to pick a fight with my dad. D is getting on in life. Despite being at retirement age, he looks a lot older due to having been physically disabled and chronically ill for over a decade. This has caused him to walk excruciatingly slowly and with a walking stick. Like this old man, he too is very stubborn and doesn't suffer fools gladly. D was out walking his dog, a cute yet annoying spaniel, along this lane with several other dog walkers. Along came C in his BMW speeding along the lane behind D as usual. D begins to step off onto the grass verge as is normal custom. Not quickly enough, however. C winds down his window and starts hurling abuse at D and his friends. Sadly I don't know the exact conversation, but it went roughly like this: C, you shouldn't be on here. D, why not? C, it's a road. They are for cars. D, it's a quiet lane. It's for pedestrians to use. Cars go on the main road. C, it's a road. Get off it. For the rest of the conversation, all C kept saying was that it was a road and D needed to get lost. By this time, several more cars had pulled up behind CD, taking this opportunity to teach in a whole a lesson. Just walked back into the middle of the lane and continued on his merry way at his usual snail pace. C lays on his horn as D's friends also take off walking. P, who had largely stayed silent, got out his phone and started filming the dog walkers whilst telling a twisted version of events. C also threatens D with the police, to which he just laughs and said he'd wait for them. P continues shouting threats. D did not care. He kept walking all the way without a car in the world, and by the time he turned off the lane at the end, there were more than a dozen cars behind C, all of them furious at C, who took off the instant D left the road. Not the best revenge, but a satisfying one nonetheless. The next one is titled, Bad Leftovers and Fancy Cars Don't Mix. About 7 or so years ago, I was living in an apartment complex with my wife and a few roomies. It was one of those places that had just enough parking spaces for the people that lived there, so parking could be tight. So when someone, say, parked over 2 spots or parked really close to the line, people took notice. In this complex we had maybe 3 or 4 handicapped spaces. A few in the front, and one next to each walkway entering the complex in the back. Where our apartment was, it was closer for us to park in the back close to where one of these spots were. We did not need the handicapped space. The handicapped space was right next to a walkway, which led to the entire right side of the complex. The walkway doubled as the van access space for the handicapped spot next to it. For a few weeks, this one guy, we'll call him Bob, parked in the marked-off van access space with his very expensive car. Bob would park so far up the ramp that you had to step up the curb and onto the grass to get around his car. He was treating it like his own personal parking space. People didn't park there for a very good reason. Since it was the major walkway for half the complex, people carried groceries in via that path, moved in and out via that path, and just generally got to the parking lot via that path. Even more so, most of us knew that one of the apartments right next to that ramp belonged to a little old lady that had to use oxygen canisters. We knew that from seeing her and the sign bolted into the wall next to her front door saying as much. Fully within view of the walkway. She had lived there so long the handicapped space that was back there was labeled hers. I personally saw her struggle to get around the car once, as well as other people moving boxes or furniture. None of this even fazed Bob. He would keep parking there and ignore anyone else's problems. We complained to the office, who just told us to call the tow truck. We called the tow truck, and they didn't show. And Bob continued to treat the ramp as his personal, private, exclusive parking lot for his quite new, quite expensive-looking car. One day, while going out to eat and whatnot with the wife and roomies, Bob was parked there again. All 4 of us were upset by it and a few comments were made. We got into our car, conversation still on Bob's seemingly tiny dick. I had placed the key into the ignition and was ready to start the car when I remembered something. There was something in my trunk. Something bad. I opened the door and got out. The wife called to me, "Reg Harris, what are you doing? What are you doing?" She knew something was up, but I wasn't ready to fess up yet. She might try to stop me. I opened the trunk. I found it. It was a Tupperware. Inside was a leftover lunch. The leftover lunch was a full helping of ham, potato and cheese casserole. Not the best meal that my wife had made, and she admits it, hadn't made it since. But, when she had made it, 6 months before, I took it to work with me and ended up eating something else, after which I promptly forgot the Tupperware in my trunk. Where it lovingly percolated for the next 6 months through one of the hottest summers our area has ever had. Every time we saw it in there, we'd always grimace and comment on how we needed to throw it out. But we didn't, like we instinctively knew it had a higher purpose. The weapon, because it could only be that anymore, sloshed with what I thought could have been water in the Tupperware as I walked to Bob's car. I stopped in front of his car, standing on the walkway. I popped the lid open and almost vomited at the smell. I turned my head and took a deep breath through my mouth. The air held a tang to it that I could only assume was still part of the weapon. I steeled myself. Moved my arm out to the side and threw the contents of the weapon toward the hood of the car like I was sowing the seed of sweet revenge. The thing I remember best about the next few moments is that the contents that came out of the weapon didn't make a splash sound. A wet thud was what I heard. It struck the hood, dead center. The momentum carried the sludge up the hood and onto the windshield, then slid back down onto the wipers and air intake. I took the now empty container and hurried away, still holding my breath. I found the closest dumpster and threw it inside. Only once I was halfway back to the car where my wife and roomies were in, did I take a breath. I got into the car grinning like an idiot. The wife asked again, "What did you do?" echoed by a roomie, while the other said, "Should we be worried?" I just said, "We should go." The wife, "Oh God." Roomie 1, Reg. "What did you do?" Roomie 2, nervous giggle. We went and got our food. While doing that I explained what it was that I had done to them. We headed back and parked in a space a bit farther away from where we had before. We took our usual route back to the apartment out of habit, which took us toward Bob's special parking space. In hindsight, we shouldn't have done that. I saw Bob on his cell phone looking at his car. I spun on my heels and started walking the other way, right past the wife and roomies. They looked at me confused and asked where I was going. I said nothing and just kept going. They followed me to another route into the complex that was much farther away, but gave us a clear look at Bob from behind as we got close to our apartment. Bob was talking to someone and it was very clear he was not happy. I never got close enough to hear what he said. I just quietly and quickly opened the apartment door. Before I was able to go inside, I saw Bob get into his car and drive off. I can only assume to clean off the warfare I had sprayed over his car. I sometimes wonder if he thinks someone did that on purpose, or if someone just got really sick. Like, CDC level sick. After that, Bob never parked in his special space again and it remained open for as long as we lived there. The next on is titled, "You're Representing Your Company." On my way home from work on Chicago, I got cut off because a guy wanted to pass a truck. That type of stuff happens all the time, but this was worse than usual. Slamming my brakes really annoyed me, so I passed him as quick as I could. Since there was heavy traffic, I couldn't get ahead of the guy who cut me off and he pulled alongside me. I'm not perfect and don't think much of flipping someone off, so I did. This got much more than the expected reaction of getting flipped off back. Weirdly, it was 75 degrees, 23-ish C, in November, so we both had our windows down. This guy starts yelling at me for flipping him off and I yelled back, "You cut me off." No surprises here. The guy says he didn't. My heated up brake pads disagree, but whatever. I noticed he was in company vehicle and said, "You're representing a company." He said he didn't care because his brother owned it. Here's where it starts picking up. He's still upset I flipped him off and starts challenging me to a fight. Lol. I don't care about this guy at all, so I laugh it off and give him the hand sign for, "You're just running your mouth." He keeps escalating, calling me a pussy and still yelling. He even said I flicked off the wrong guy because he's an outlaw. Okay, we are driving side by side yelling at each other. I guess this guy really wanted to get under my skin, scare me, or wanted to actually injure me because he revved his engine while swerving into my lane. I moved over in time into the left turn lane but was able to continue straight unimpeded as he went back to his lane quickly. For the story, I would like to say this really scared me or upset me or set me over the edge, but it just gave me the ammo I needed. I got home safely and got to work. I have a dashboard camera, so I went back to the footage of the guy cutting me off. I got so close even with slamming my brakes that I could read everything. His company name and phone number were at my fingertips. I thought to myself, even if his brother runs the company, which I doubt, he probably wouldn't want this huge liability driving his work truck besmirching his company name. I called, explained the situation, and the receptionist told me no brothers worked there. Surprise, surprise. She then asked for the footage, to which I happily obliged. Here is her response: "Okay, thanks again for letting us know. I do believe he was on his way home from work, so he will not be allowed to drive his work vehicle home, and we are purchasing dash cams for all of our company vehicles going forward. I'm very sorry this was your experience, and please know we'll be doing everything we can to correct this behavior going forward." Oh yeah, nothing like taking a few minutes out of my day to ruin this guy's work commute. He'll have to drive to the company, pick up his service truck, work, then drop off the truck before going home instead of just going to jobs then going home. The last one is titled, "Think You Can Outdrink Me? Think Again." Background: I'm a 5 feet tall tiny girl, but I grew up in a heavy drinking family, so I have excellent drinking capacity. I'm also in law school with insufferable know-it-alls and duckboys who think they're the best at anything and everything, especially when compared with girls. This was about 3 years ago. I was in my second year of law school and we were organizing an event on our campus, and I was a member of the organizing committee along with a bunch of senior boys. Generally, people joined these committees because we'd get this one room with a balcony in our academic block all to ourselves for weeks, where we would chill and drink and smoke up, literally all anyone does in law schools in my country. There were these two fifth-year boys. Law is a 5-year course here, in the committee with me, one of them genuinely there to work too, I'll call him M, the other there to make sure everyone had a good time, I'll call him P. The first time M and I pulled an all-nighter to make sure everything was in place for the next day, P joined us to make sure his friend M also had adequate alcohol. He asked me if I wanted some too, I said duh. So P gets out these glasses and pours some whiskey in both. I like whiskey, so no issues. He then started adding some water, because we didn't have ice, in the glasses, and my natural reaction was, wait, you're diluting it. They looked at me a little weirdly. We had a tiny bit of conversation and realized that I prefer my whiskey neat, but they cannot handle neat whiskey at all, so they always dilute it with chilled water. M was cool with it, but it irked P a lot because he could not fathom how a tiny girl 3 years younger than him could claim to drink neat whiskey. Since then, he decided he would try to get me super drunk just to prove that he had better capacity than me. Kept making jabs at me every time I refused a drink. I was still working during the day, about me being a pussy and I am all talk but I can't actually drink much. It was pretty annoying. This one time, I was drinking plain Coca-Cola, not spiked, because I was working on something and P decided to take a sip of it because he assumed it would be spiked. Usually all my drinks are. He realized it wasn't and then he started teasing me about how I need really strong drinks like Coke mixed with Pepsi, dripping with sarcasm. My revenge happened the last night of our event. Everything wrapped up, we had a bit of a party in our organizing room with all the volunteers and we decided to play the game Kings. It's a drinking game that involves, frankly, a lot of drinking, and P suggested it hoping to get me smashed. It's basically a deck of cards and each card has a designated action. For example, 6 is for the chicks, so when someone picks up a 6, all the girls drink. One of the cards is a pair card. If you draw that card, you choose another person to drink every time you do the entire night till someone else picks up a pair card. I was lucky enough to get that pair card early on, and immediately I chose P as my pair. We also had an unofficial rule in the beginning that P himself added, which was that in case of pairs, the pair has to drink the same amount of alcohol that the original person drinks. I had some friends playing too, and they immediately caught on to what I was planning. So every time someone picked up a card that required them to choose someone to drink, they picked me. I would purposely loose the categories round so I would have to drink. If I did 3 shots, P would also have to do 3 shots. Hardly half an hour later, P was out of it. We were both drinking literally the same amount of alcohol, but he was smashed while I was still in control of my senses and playing the game. P couldn't even enjoy the rest of the party because he was passed out while we all had fun till early morning. We're a tiny campus, so word spread around fast. Since then, everyone started teasing P about not being able to handle his alcohol and for losing to a tiny 20-year-old girl. P never tried to pick on me for anything again and my entire campus hails me as some sort of drinking legend. Thanks for listening.